Number one Ibble Dibble here. Hello, friends. So, yesterday and the day before, I spent watching way more TV than I usually do because I buckled down and watched all 5 episodes of Heart of Invictus. I'm not going to break down each character and their story arc or each episode and its content in this review. If you're looking for a summary review, I'm sure there are other videos about it. This video is just my review, my rant, my ramble, my opinions. The comments here are a place to chat about it if you've seen it, if you want to, if you don't. So, first of all, it was very difficult for me to motivate myself to even turn this documentary on because I'm deeply anti war and am categorically against any depiction of soldiers that glamorizes war. So, I simply do not watch any of the 500 movies that seem to come out every year about it. In my opinion, these movies rewrite history in the popular imagination to the point where recruits always say they want to do something noble, fight for a good cause, see the world, spread freedom and democracy, or communism and solidarity, depending on where you're from.
Being a soldier, yes. So I wanted to help other people, and I thought that I was going to make a difference in the world.
제 원래 장래 희망은 직업군인하고 경찰관이었습니다. 이제 나라를 지키는 것도 군에서 감전을 당해서 그 당시에 기억은 없습니다.
As if war, literally fighting and killing on foreign soil, is some kind of humanitarian mission. I believe repeatedly seeing fake heroes in fake depictions of real wars, like World War II, like Vietnam, has widened the definition of hero way too far, to the point where disenfranchised and/or naive young people daily commit war crimes to preserve or expand the profits of billionaires and millionaires who literally don't care if they live or die. In exchange, they're depicted as the essence of nobility and patriotism in our media and thanked for their service by well-meaning but ultimately ignorant civilians when they come home, if they happen to survive, which doesn't at all make up for the ones that don't, or the ones that do but never receive the health care they frequently require. Not to mention all the people they killed or maimed while they were abroad. I'm, of course, speaking from an American perspective, but I believe it's true of other countries as well, particularly those we usually drag in it with us. The military-industrial complex is a hideous, insidious, continuous transfer of wealth from the public sector to the private sector, from the very poor to the oligarchy, in literal pounds of flesh. That has been going on for at least my entire lifetime, and I'm 40. Where are the movies about this? Where are the movies depicting the CEOs of Lockheed Martin and BP for what they truly are? These villains are more frightening than any mastermind we see in spy films like Mission Impossible or the latest James Bond reboot. None of this has been about defending our safety or sovereignty or even standard of living. Not that I would ever want an 18-year-old boy to die to keep down the cost of filling up my tank. And anyway, the standard of living has dropped for everyone but the already quite wealthy over the same time period, the past 35 years. How many times has someone you know said or written on Facebook something outrageous like, they died in the jungle/desert to protect your freedom at home? An egregious lie. Without stopping to think, they're just parroting a soundbite concocted by a think tank, funded by military contractors, that has been delivered at every opportunity by politicians at every level, whose campaigns have been funded by the very same contractors and think tanks, and then repeated ad nauseum by media outlets quoting, discussing, and co-opting the message. This school of propaganda was invented solely to keep the wars going, keep the volunteers coming, keep their labor and sacrifice cheap, keep distracting Americans from what would be a serious crisis of conscience for many if we were to actually stop wasting billions playing Team America World Police, and would-be soldiers had to find work that paid a living wage at home. And everyone finally had to admit companies weren't really paying those living wages, and the government has for many decades been less interested in providing for its citizens than in providing for itself and its corporate overlords / campaign donors. Thankfully, Harry addresses this, albeit briefly just for the sake of dismissing it, but at least in a sincere, succinct manner in the first episode.
Not everyone agrees on what qualifies as a just war, but I think we would all agree on the damage that war causes to so many people. The Games doesn't focus on what causes the injury, but really about the recovery from that injury and how to be part of a community again.
You're right. I completely agree. Moreover, I wholly support the Invictus Games. I think they're fantastic. I think they accomplish something unique and powerful for vets, and I hope they continue and grow as long as that's true. So did the filmmakers get the memo? Because it's pretty hard to acknowledge the different types of heartbreak precipitating the event, and they need to carefully consider their tone. They don't always get it right. There's constant thanking everyone for their quote-unquote service. They really throw around the words hero and freedom.
I think the heroism of wounded servicemen and women going back into the fight is the most extraordinary example of Invictus and the continuity of service.
I respectfully disagree. And they even indulge in some visual imagery to this effect. For example, look at this beautiful shot of Gabriel George, one of the vets featured. He's an amputee, swimmer, archer. He looks like a Greek bust. Living, breathing Hercules or Alexander. Probably unwittingly, perhaps purposefully, though. On balance, it's more of an anti-war movie simply because so much focus and so much time is spent on describing in detail the various types and ludicrous amounts of pain and suffering these vets endured and continue to endure. I never thought I'd say this, but thankfully, the only truly delusional glorification that seems to be happening is that of Henry Mountbatten Windsor, who blithely calls 10 weeks in Afghanistan a tour of duty when most men served 12 to 18 months twice over.
The whole reason I was allowed to go to Afghanistan in the first place is because it was kept a secret. While I was there for the 10 weeks, no one knew, apart from British press that had all said, oh, we'll keep quiet as long as we get access. I'd spent 10 weeks on the ground in the sand with all the others. To suddenly be on the way home, I was angry. Stepping foot off the plane, I was angry that this has happened to these guys. I was angry that the media weren't covering it. I was angry that I'd been pulled out.
He keeps saying angry at the press, but does he mean embarrassed by daddy pulling the plug? And of course, he bravely attempts to pioneer mental health awareness in the year 2023, because obviously none of us have ever heard of it before.
When I joined the military, mental health, mental illness was a dirty word. One of the things that I'm most proud of is the work that David Wiseman and I did, giving talks to people inside the military. We encouraged them to accept that, okay, fine, if mental health means mental illness, which it doesn't, but if it does in your mentality, then let's just put that to one side. Let's talk about mental fitness. If there's a stigma within the military, then there will be a stigma within society. So if we really want to cure the stigma within society, we have to lead the way.
No. I think it's wonderful they gave talks to soldiers, but that logic is clearly flawed. Soldiers' ideas about mental health are not taken on by the greater society. That's not where we get our ideas about this from.
Bodies and minds can be complicated. Everyone's going to have dog days, right? Everyone's going to struggle at some point. That's life. And most of these things are out of our control anyway. We can control some things, but we can't control other things.
Well, ring the alarm. That's a hot take. He's also definitely an oversharer. At one point, he kind of dumps his own stuff on a participant who's emotionally struggling. He doesn't say her name, but he tries to relate to a double amputee with chronic alcoholism by talking about how he more or less lost his mind when he broke up with Chelsea Davy.
I had that moment in my life where I didn't know about it, but because of the trauma of losing my mum when I was 12, for all those years, I had no emotion. I was unable to cry. I was unable to feel. I didn't know it at the time. Right. And it wasn't until later on in my life, at age 28, there was a circumstance that happened that the first few bubbles started coming out. And then suddenly it was like someone shook it, it went poof. And then it was chaos. My emotions were sprayed all over the wall, everywhere I went. And I was like, how the hell do I contain this? I've gone from nothing to everything, and I now need to find myself, like get a glass jar and put myself in it, leave the lid open. And my therapist said, you choose what comes in, and everything else bounces off.
Okay. That's good advice.
Great advice. I'm sure this guy can just let the platitudes come in, let the whiskey bounce off. And lucky for you too, Harry, now you're married to a lady with a personality disorder that prevents her from caring about you in any way. So all of your emotional shrapnel just bounces off of her like magic. Thankfully, the glorification of Harry was all self-glorification. The filmmaker really didn't indulge in this. In fact, there are some parts so unflattering to Harry's intellect that I'm surprised they were left in. My favorite is this anecdote.
Knowing how dark it gets and how dark it has got for some of these people, 1 step forward, 3 steps back. But the longer that they persist, then a lot of these individuals get through and out of that trench that they've been stuck in.
So they back out of the trench Monty Python style? I do love me a mixed metaphor. It all raises the question, is the documentary overly centered on Harry? I actually don't think it was. I do mean this. As hilariously executed as some of Harry's stuff is, I don't think it's that big of a deal that he centered the narrative on himself, because this is the first Invictus Games documentary where people are learning how the games came about and he is the founder. You can be an idiot or even a bad person and still do good things. Harry's intentions are good. And founding the Invictus Games is, I think, undebatably the best thing he's ever done. And really, despite all of his bad behavior and inappropriate behavior, that one redeeming factor about Harry comes through here. At least when it comes to combat vets, Harry does care. I think it's great he's stuck with it, because there are a lot of charities he didn't stick with. You know, even if you're no longer a royal patron, you can still show up to your aunt's dinner party and write a check. Harry is more than entitled to be there. He's the natural choice to narrate this story. I just wish he wouldn't pull his weirdness and his wife into it. Speaking of Meghan, Meghan appears very briefly, only for the glossy events, dressed to the nines in piles of jewels, shaking hands and smiling and giving pat little introductory speeches.
All right.
Let's go.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for your service, and thank you to all the family and the friends that are here who've been supporting you along the way. Because this is service, this is dedication, and this is the Invictus family. Please welcome my incredible husband, Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex.
The optics are just not good. She's wearing $250,000 of jewelry, literally, in front of a crowd of disabled veterans on pensions at best, disability or charity at worst. And it's more important to them to show everyone how in love they are than to be a little sensitive to the fact that soldiers returning from deployment are almost twice as likely, 1.93 times as likely to divorce as the general population. It occurred to me watching this that Meghan thinks she's still a princess. She thinks that's still her job. As in, all she has to do is look pretty, be polite, wear some fancy jewelry for people to gawk at, and they'll be flattered, if not honored, by her presence. She doesn't get it at all. And Harry doesn't really seem to either.
We haven't done this for a while.
I know.
My heart.
Gosh, that's tough. Back on the chain gang. Which brings me to my next point. The elephant in the room, to me, is that almost all of the vets selected to tell their stories are suffering from identity issues, trouble reconciling who they were and who they are. That cannot be glossed over with the term mental health. It can't be glossed over with PTSD.
When I was a soldier, that meant the world to me. And then once I was wounded, well, how do you define yourself then?
I kind of treat it as a past life, and this is just the memory of that past life.
But we have a community of people, and a vast majority of them after 1 games feel like they have found themselves again. That is literally saving lives every day.
How do you determine that, Harry? Exit polling? Identity is a moral, cultural, experiential, and very fluid element of being a member of society that's usually presented in New Age self help guides, like the ones favored by Harry and Meg's, as something already there inside you to be discovered or found when it's not necessarily.
I hope that we'll be finding each other again as a team and hopefully to find myself.
Philosophically speaking, if we consider our identity something innate that we can only soften the edges around, we accept that our lives will be spent living with, compensating for, and perhaps rationalizing to others our traumas rather than genuinely embracing and moving past them. I accept and respect that some traumas are insurmountable, but not all. And that's why it still grates so much to hear Harry talking about the trauma of losing his mother in 1997, because it's a relatively commonplace trauma. It's a nonviolent trauma, and it's been a very long time. And he keeps telling people who've had it way worse than him about it. I don't judge H&M for reinventing themselves. I judge them for reinventing themselves as ever more selfish, deceptive, aggressive people who use everyone around them, including these vets, to regulate their emotions and passing it off as the healthy growing pains of traumatized people. No, nope. I hate to see them promulgating that concept, and I hate to see it filtering down to the participants in Invictus.
PTSD is not a permanent thing, but when it sticks to you, it's because of other traumas or other issues that you have from your upbringing.
That is a very inaccurate generalization that seems to segue way too cleanly into...
The trigger to me was actually returning from Afghanistan, but the stuff that was coming up was from 1997, from the age of 12. Losing my mum at such a young age. The trauma that I had, I was never really aware of. It was never discussed. I didn't really talk about it. And I suppressed it like most youngsters would have done. But then when it all came fizzing out, I was bouncing off the walls. I was like, what is going on here? I'm now feeling everything as opposed to being numb. The biggest struggle for me was the people that no one around me really could help. I didn't have that support structure, that network, or that expert advice to identify what was actually going on with me. Unfortunately, like most of us, the first time you really consider therapy is when you're lying on the floor in the fetal position, probably wishing that you dealt with some of this stuff previously. And that's what I really want to change.
Did you see it coming? The answer is so close in this documentary. For a time, Invictus gives these vets something to live for, something to identify with proudly, and a support system. But of course, the doc doesn't dare ask the participants, what will you become after Invictus and how can we support that? We know you have courage, but what are your convictions? And obviously, it doesn't ask. Statistically, in their home countries, what will become of them and how can we improve those circumstances? I don't think it's a coincidence that the featured guys from Denmark and Korea shared more concrete ideas about their own identity and goals because their countries have stronger social safety nets than the US, where vets just struggling to survive for years on end is a far more likely outcome. The Ukrainian woman featured, Tyra, did share her principles, which are admirable.
Гідність і ніколи не брехати. Думаю, що ці принципи ведуть мене по життю більше.
I'd like to note that she was never a soldier. She was a medic. But I was also surprised they were featured because they are exactly what Harry has come under fire for, losing his dignity and misleading with half-truths. Perhaps like this review, as a film, this movie really dragged. I found myself constantly switching it off to watch other stuff. I probably spent more time in break mode than in watch mode. If you're curious, all the Joanna Lumley travel shows are fantastic. Anyway, Heart of Invictus is comprised of 5 45-minute episodes, like Harry and Meghan, with a lot of redundant dialogue and an unnecessarily melodramatic score, also like Harry and Meghan. I'll stop there, but people playing sports over music like that is a solid third of this TV series. And about halfway through episode 3, I had had enough and started playing it at 1.5 times speed, like Harry and Meghan. The sound mixing really annoys me because they also frequently try to sort of sonically depict a PTSD flashback or a trauma-related out-of-body experience.
Just to Bavaria as well. No, we're just having a chat about it. Whistle have got, but you were in there and you were getting picked out. It was like Jake's penalised me before going. Well, I'm not saying that. Don't worry about that. At the same time, I didn't get 7 seconds. But you've got to just be careful.
Tonally, they seem to be trying for bittersweet, but landing on low-level, constant misery. I suspect it's because Violet Films, the production/direction team they selected to do this for them, because let's not play, H&M didn't do anything except 5-minute interviews, is more or less a heartstring pulling documentary factory. And I think it's easy for them to rely on trope and lose poignancy when you make these movies all day, every day. I also think Harry and Meghan are insisting on this ridiculous drawn out format to fulfill their contractual obligations to Netflix with the fewest projects and the least effort possible, because there's simply no reason for either of these stories, or non-stories as the case may be, to last 5 hours. Also, some people may say this is nitpicking, but it annoyed me immensely. They show Tyra smoking several times. It's terrible role modeling, and they shouldn't have used those shots. Kids, don't smoke. Even if you're willing to accept the related health risks, subjecting the people and animals around you to them via secondhand smoke is unacceptable. Harmful carcinogens are present in dangerous proportions more than 30 feet around someone who's smoking and attached to objects in a smoker's environment where they can cause them harm later, even when the smoker isn't smoking. Just don't. Speaking of Tyra and Ukraine, they made the onset of the war in Ukraine, Tyra's capture and torture, a big storyline. Why don't they make a film about and with Tyra? That could be a great, insightful, chilling documentary. Not to mention potentially actually get them some award nominations, some festival action, because this certainly won't. If they haven't jumped on that, it's because they're too slow, too stupid, or too scared. Or maybe H&M don't do projects where they can't grandstand. What do you think? Have you seen Invictus? Have you tried to watch it and just turned it off? Share your opinions in the comments below. I love to hear from you. Toodles! Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.